Hi everyone, welcome. Today is Tuesday, April 13th, chapter 6, Ramon's test. As soon as my brother gets his license, he's going to buy a car. And then we can take trips to all sorts of places, Julio promised Lucas. Lucas's family owned a car, but still Lucas was impressed. It was one thing for a parent to go driving and another for a brother, especially a brother as friendly as Ramon. Julio and Lucas knew they could both look forward to good times when Ramon took them riding. I have a list of places where we can go, said Julio. He began to rattle off sites that would no longer be so distant once he had someone to drive him. That big amusement park in Woodbury, the aquarium, going to the beach in the summer, it's going to be fantastic. Well, your brother has a job, so he can't take you driving just any old time. And sometimes he'll want to go off with his friends without us tagging along, said Lucas. Aw, he'll squeeze us in even if he has friends in the car, said Julio confidently. Not if the friend is a girl, said Lucas, who had learned about such things from TV and the movies. No way, Jose, said Julio. Ramon takes his driving test in a couple of days, and he's already been looking at cars. I bet we can go driving with him by next week. That's okay by me, said Lucas. I hope you are right. Ramon was scheduled to take his driving test on the first Tuesday of February. On the morning of the test, Julio was surprised to see his brother looking rattled. He buttoned his shirt wrong when he was getting dressed, and he didn't even notice. It was their grandmother who called the mistake to his attention when he came into the kitchen to fix himself some breakfast. Almost at once, Ramon spilled the orange juice when he was pouring himself a glass, and then he burned the bagel he was fixing in the little toaster oven. The whole kitchen smelled of oven-roasted bagel. Mrs. Sanchez opened the window to clear the air. Hey, it's 20 degrees outside, Nelson complained. We're all going to freeze to death. Put on a sweatshirt, his mother advised him. At least it didn't snow, Ramon said. Julio remembered that in addition to thinking about the driving test, Ramon had been checking the weather report every day. Snow would just make everything that much harder. There might be ice on the road, which could make a car skid. Or if it had snowed the day before, there would be piles of snow along the curbs that would make parking much more difficult, if not impossible. Mrs. Sanchez closed the window. Take another bagel, she told Ramon. You'll drive better if you aren't hungry as well as nervous. Hey man, you'll ace the test. Stop worrying, Nelson said. Tomorrow is another day, commented the grandmother in Spanish. Julio knew she meant that if Ramon didn't get his license today, he'd have another chance. But Julio also knew that was the last thing Ramon liked hearing. He didn't want another chance. He'd been waiting for this license since before Julio was even born. Ramon wanted it now. I know you can do it. You'll pass. You'll see, he said to Ramon as he gave his brother a hug. Thanks, kid. I'll take you for the first ride after I pass the test and after I buy a car. I knew it, said Julio, beaming. Can Lucas come along too? What about me? Asked their grandmother. Tomorrow is another day, Ramon told her in Spanish, and everyone except their grandmother laughed. Mrs. Sanchez left for work. The boys left for school, and their grandmother was left with their breakfast dishes and her favorite TV programs to help her pass the hours. Even though she spoke so little English, she seemed to understand enough to follow what was being said on the screen. One didn't need to know any spoken language to figure out the result of Ramon's test. He walked into the apartment at the end of the day, and his whole body gave the news. Bad news. He had failed the road test. He was unhappy, and he was angry too. How could that happen? Nelson asked. You know how to drive. The examiner said I went too fast. I zipped into the parking space in one try. I made the U-turn without any problem, but he said I didn't stop long enough at the stop sign. And he said, I pulled out too quickly from the parking space, but I know I was good. I should have passed. Ramon pounded his fist on the kitchen table. I'm a very good driver, even with all the practice that the other kids got. I should have passed that test. I know I should have. What about the others? Asked Mrs. Sanchez. How did they do? That's the crazy thing, said Ramon. Lucy and Caroline both passed. Lucy is a nervous wreck when she drives. She has to chew gum or she can't even get the car started. She says the gum relaxes her, and one day when she forgot to bring any gum to school, she wouldn't even take her turn at the wheel. She's nuts, but she passed. What about the other boy who's in your group? Asked Julio. Jeff, he failed too. It really doesn't make sense. He isn't as good as me, but he drives better than either of the girls, and I drove the best. So why did I fail? I'll tell you something, Mrs. Sanchez said. I didn't want to mention it before because maybe it wasn't true, but I was discussing the driving test with Simon, who works at the front desk at the motel. He told me that the more often than not, the examiners automatically fail boys who are taking the test for the first time. It isn't a matter of how well you drive, but statistically, more males get into accidents than females, and they figure what the failure will make you be more careful in the future and perhaps prevent careless driving. Lily. That's terrible, said Ramon. Besides that, it's sexist, it's illegal, it's dishonest. But Julio noticed that his brother's mood seemed to change slightly. It was as if what his mother said took away some of the pain of failure. He was still annoyed, but not at himself. If all boys taking the test had a greater chance of failure than girls, it meant he wasn't a bad driver after all. It was just the way the motor vehicle bureau did things. And let me tell you something else, Mrs. Sanchez said. Simon told me that his wife failed her driving test 6 times before she finally passed. Nelson let out a whistle. She had to be a rotten driver to fail that many times, said Ramon. No. Simone says she just panicked every time she sat beside the examiner. And now that she'd had her license, she drives without any trouble at all. She's never had an accident. How long has she been driving? 2 weeks? Asked Nelson. No, said Mrs. Sanchez. 27 years. She even drove across the country once when she and Simone were going to a family wedding in Colorado, and he had broken his arms and couldn't drive at all. Talk, talk, talk. When do you do your work at the motel? If you talked so much to that Simone. Julio's grandmother wanted to know. I get a 15-minute coffee break twice a day, said Mrs. Sanchez to her mother. Talking with Simone has fewer calories than a cup of coffee and a muffin. The mention of food reminded Julio that he was hungry. What's for supper? He asked. While they were eating supper, Mrs. Sanchez remembered one more thing that Simone had told her. No matter how many times you take the driving test, once you have a license, that's it. No one knows if you took the test once or a dozen times. There isn't a number painted on the back of your car to inform people about your past driving history. Ramon let out a laugh. The only cars that have numbers are race cars, he said. He took a second helping of chicken. There was no question that he was feeling loads better than he had when he returned home earlier. You know what, Mr. Hughes said the morning before we took the road test? He said, even with lessons and a license, you don't really learn how to drive until you have the license and are using a car on a regular basis in all sorts of traffic situations. It's really weird. You can't drive until you get a license, but you don't learn to drive until you get one. You can't drive until you get a car, Nelson reminded his brother. That's not going to be a problem, Ramon said confidently. But keep your fingers crossed that it doesn't snow on February 14th, he told his family. February 14th is Valentine's Day, said Julio. What's happening then? That's the day that I rescheduled for my next road test, said Ramon. I sure hope I don't need to take 7 of them like Simone's wife. Julio chewed thoughtfully on his chicken. He always looked up to Ramon, but tonight he studied his brother with more than his usual admiration. Even though Ramon had failed his road test, He already was cheerful and positive about retaking the test. He could even joke about it. Usually Julio tried to imitate Ramon's attitude toward life, but in this matter of testing, it wasn't going to work. If he had to repeat the 4th grade standardized test 7 times, he wouldn't be promoted to the next grade for 7 years. He'd even end up in the Guinness Book of World Records as the oldest 4th grader in history. He just had to do well the first time, he decided. But of course, it was easier said than done. That's the end of chapter 6. Ramon's test. Tomorrow we'll be in chapter 7, practice test. All right, boys and girls, see you then.